The first expert speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is a man that normally should not need any introduction. Franck Leveque is the global client leader driving Frost & Sullivan mobility activity in Europe, and this since 2011. He was made partner at Frost & Sullivan in 2015. Franck is particularly interested and experienced in the areas around connected vehicles, new mobility and transportation, and also retail, where he has a strong focus on innovation, on new business models, and on the latest services that are coming into the marketplace. So he is the right person to kick off this conference by connecting the dots and to unlock fleet efficiency. Franck Leveque, I hope that you can hear me, and welcome to the 2021 Connected Fleets Conference.
Thank you, Stephen, for the very, very kind introduction. I'm just going, can you hear me very well?
I can hear you perfectly well.
Very good.
I am going to close my screen so that you can now also start sharing your screen.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much for the kind introduction in the meantime, and of course, this is the second time I attend this session. I was in Brussels last year, and I must say the only thing I'm missing this year is the croissant, the pain au chocolat, and a nice coffee. I do have the coffee at home, but I do miss the pain au chocolat and the croissants. I hope you can all see my screen.
Yes, you can just put it in the full presentation mode. Perfect, Frank. And if
Excellent.
You can perhaps hide the little bar. We see a little bar below. Yes, indeed.
Here you go.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So good morning and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be in front of you, and thank you once again, Stephen, for the opportunity. In this first session that you have invited me to present on, my aim is to give you a 360-degree perspective on the trends, on the market, on sharing some key figures, interesting developments that are setting the scene for many of the presentation and the deep dives that we will have today around the topic of fleet, connected fleet, last mile mobility. This is really what I'd like to share from very varied perspective, and hopefully set the scene for the day. So let me get into it, but I always like to start my presentation stepping back, understanding what are the major themes in the mobility of at the moment that are driving and the redefinition of the market for mobility, transformational trends, as I like to call them. The 8 of them that I think are tremendously important for our industry. Connectivity, digitization, data modernization, certainly one of the key one, and we'll go into more details. The advent of cognitive era, that's basically the development of autonomous vehicles, but also beyond that, with flying vehicles, drones, urban flying taxis, and many other bots that have been deployed in the past few years to support the development of new mobility solutions, both for people and for goods. The fundamental shift of ownership to usership, with the development of subscription models, but also the development of new mobility solutions that have been challenged somewhat through COVID, but that are redesigning the landscape and consumer habits in many different ways. Obviously, the development of electrification that has been heightened, accelerated in the past 12 months in particular, through this pandemic and crisis that we are facing all at the same time. But also, and I think it's important to highlight, what I call the flattening of sales, vehicle sales. And that is beyond, it was before the crisis, and it will be beyond the crisis, especially in the mature market. And that is setting the scene for very exciting new scenarios, new ways of operating mobility, whether, again, for people and for goods. If you bring that to the fleet market and the leasing market, I think it's important to realize, obviously, there are some parallels that can be drawn, of course, and some elements that have been accelerated in the past 12 months through COVID. And, it's difficult not to talk about it. But electrification, I mentioned, the development of used car leasing, the development of an acceleration of LCV leasing as well, as a consequence of that increased need for last mile delivery, home delivery, that has been sort of accelerated through, all of us buying more online. At the same time, some underlying trends towards operating leasing, private leasing, that focus towards SMEs that have been there for a while, for the past few years in particular. Even though we have experienced a reduction in the growth volume that as a consequence of the crisis, I think the penetration is still continuing, and that focus is certainly still there. Connectivity highlighted here because I would say finally it is making it to the top of the agenda for corporates, for the leasing, and for the operators in the passenger and light commercial vehicles, and especially in the passenger. Light commercial is a slightly different environment, and it's a workhorse environment, and I'll come back to that. But really good to see how connectivity is being implemented to help improve efficiency, to help improve CSR, to help improve safety and security within these fleets. And the impact element that you see at the bottom in each of these sections here is there. If you just wonder what does it mean, it is actually to emphasize the impact of each of these strands on after sales, which is an important part of the overall automotive business, is being impacted in very different ways. Whether we are taking the spot of a vehicle manufacturer or independent garages, and very important to realize the impact that these developments are having on after sales. In this slide, what I want to emphasize is really, I really like this slide, I have to say. It just is full slide, it's loads of data, but what it aims to show is how important is true fleet. True fleet in light vehicles. 12% of all vehicles in Europe, we are looking at the complete park here, 42 million are actually included in fleets. And that market is growing at 2%. 2% growth in the fleet segment, 0.85 in the retail market. So basically, we have a market. We are focusing on a market that is growing faster than average. That is driving the market in many ways. This is what I find exciting. And if you actually take that same slide and look at the market for new registration, you will see that in 2019, you had 43% of all vehicles that are newly registered, that were newly registered, that were in fleets. And that is actually growing even faster at 4% between 2019 and 2024. So, and a negative growth in retail, in fact, in the new registration segment. This is actually setting the scene for what I would call an increased interest that we are seeing on the fleet market from across the value chain. Of course, COVID has had its impact, but the fleet market has been also a lot more resilient. not only because of the structural sort of a setup of the fleet market, but also because we have been quite innovative in this segment, with more flexible leasing terms, with subscription models, with contract extension, used car leasing, as I was mentioning earlier, to retain customers and help deflect the tough economic context we are facing. If you bring that to the LCV market, we expect growth in new registration driven by last mile delivery and emission regulations. And again, we are seeing exciting deployment of new specific solution for this sort of a last mile delivery need from leasing and rental companies. And that is expected to remain also beyond COVID. On the right-hand side, we are seeing a faster growth of the operational leasing and the financial leasing over that outright purchase. And that is a consequence of fleet operators being, cash strapped in many ways, and sort of a traditional situation, and especially coming out of or during and coming out of a crisis, generally the leasing market is strengthening, and we will see the same here. Also wanted to give an outlook on the light commercial market. You're seeing on the top of this screen, quarter by quarter, 2019 sales versus 2020. Overall, a 18% decrease, but quarter 3 and quarter 4 actually did very well and caught up back with the drivers that I mentioned earlier. But what I find quite interesting is what you have at the bottom here, which provides basically an understanding of the current and forecasted powertrain shift that we expect between 2020 and 2025, with clear winners and clear losers. XEVs, including plug-in hybrids as well as BEVs, battery electric vehicle, from less than 2% in 2020 to almost 12% in 2025 of all vehicles that will be sold. And the clear loser being diesel, of course. And that increase is being supported by many incentives, monetary and non-monetary regulations, of course, but also incentives by governments that are being placed to support the acquisition of these electric light commercial vehicles. Of course, the topic is connected vehicles, connected fleets. And I like to take this slide again, that I present very often on connected vehicles and connected cars, because I think it sets the scene as to what is important for defining a successful strategy in connected vehicles. Like in a digital strategy, in fact, it needs to achieve 3 things, 3 buckets. Upgrade refers to that capacity to optimize processes, reduce cost, and in this context is avoid recall. It's improve the vehicle continuously throughout the life cycle. That monetize is all about generating new revenue stream beyond the traditional telematics and infotainment. It's, I think, that ability to shift that value creation in the automotive industry from that time of selling the vehicle to creating value throughout the life cycle of the vehicle with features and function on demand that these new generation vehicle will actually allow. And retain. Retain is probably, I think, one of the most powerful and underutilized sort of a benefit or feature of connectivity to build that customer intimacy, to sort of support the fact that that impression that that vehicle is always new for many years, as opposed to being excited about the vehicle for the first 3 months or 6 months at best in the traditional model. I think the only vehicle manufacturer that is really at the forefront of that is not let's put it this way, is not a traditional vehicle manufacturer. And for me, at the forefront you have Tesla. So, oops, sorry for that. When you bring that to the light commercial vehicle, connectivity to the light commercial vehicle, I think what is really important as a starting point is to understand that, LCVs, vans, are working capital that are operating in highly diversified industries, sectors, from utilities with thousands of vehicles to the corner shop that has one van, delivery vehicles, all with different needs, different requirements, different operating models. And that is reflected in a diversity of solutions that are required to support their operation, that we can actually segment in 5 different areas, from vehicle management, driver management, work order or workforce management, fleet management, and safety and security. I think, again, interesting to see how the pandemic has sort of developed new solutions, such as video camera to detect whether the driver is wearing the mask or not, accelerated contactless solution, such as digital payment, proof of delivery, or fully automated order management, which are solutions that are expected to remain and to become the norm beyond the crisis that we are facing. So what does it look like? How many vehicles do have connectivity, a connected solution? Well, if you look at the European market today for vans, that's what we are looking at, and VIO, vehicle in operation, you have almost 20% penetration. What we've seen in the past 12 months is we haven't seen many operators stopping their contracts. Telematics has become and connectivity has become a fundamental a tool to their operation. But what we've seen is a reduction in the amount of features that they are covering in order to reduce the cost a little bit. Despite these difficulties, what we've seen in 2020 is actually still a double-digit growth over 2019 in terms of the unit installation. And at the bottom right here is service revenue. I want to emphasize that because between 2020 and 2025, we'll see a doubling of the revenue, driven by specific solution around video cameras-based solution, prognostics, EV telematics, but also the need for connected solution in sharing and rental or digital freight solutions. In order to overcome that inefficiency in the processes, inefficiency in the utilization of the asset on the road, as well as high frequency track and trace. These are some of the key solutions that will actually drive revenue. When we talk about that acceleration of e-commerce and home deliveries through COVID, that we've all supported in our own way at home through the purchases that we make. I think it has had significant implication in many different ways. But I want to actually take the angle of these new mobility players that we've all talked about over the past 5-7 years in particular. Whether they are car sharing companies, whether they are e-hailing companies. Obviously, the pandemic has had significant impact, to say the least, on their core business, right? But these companies have been very fast at repurposing their operation, repurposing their fleet towards home delivery for grocery, for food, for medical supply. And this realignment is not compensating for everything, all the loss, of course, but has certainly helped many of them to survive at the very least, and I think will be instrumental in the mid and long term structuring, as well as establishing new standard for mobility for the mobility market. That sort of a cross-pollination of application. And I think the last mile mobility, last mile delivery is and has become the new Eldorado, with exciting new solutions, multimodal, new business models, new players that have actually come into that space. Of course, we are also, we can't talk about this market without talking about autonomous. Generally we had seen a slowdown in the autonomous investment, especially from traditional vehicle manufacturers around autonomous cars and robo-taxis. The one area that actually has been accelerated in the past 18 months is actually the last mile delivery, and with a very strict and clear business case in terms of cost reduction, in terms of process optimization, but also in that capacity to provide that contactless solution that has been quite important in the past few months, with a number of pilots across the globe, but especially in North America and in China. I want to highlight one here, which I find quite interesting, is a Neuro example on the top right corner, because it is actually the first autonomous vehicle operator to have received federal authorization to mass produce its driverless vehicle. And they have already been delivering food, personal protective equipment, clean linens, and many more items within their operational environment. Another topic that I've experienced to have generated a lot of interest is that topic of demand responsive transit, demand responsive shuttle, DRT as we call it sometimes. This market is expected to literally explode, and was even accelerated through this crisis. The use case is relatively clear for transport and local transport agencies. Reduction of costs of transport operation, and an alternative to that fixed system, public transport system that has been operating for many decades, with an increased utilization of the asset, with an on-demand frequency, with that capacity to expand the network coverage even beyond the highly dense area, even covering rural areas, in fact. With exciting companies, and there's quite a few, and I'm taking a couple of examples, but Via is one example that I personally like. They've done tremendously well over the past few years. They are now operating with about 90 transit agencies across the globe, 20 countries. In fact, they are operating as a startup still, clocking in 2020 about 70 million rides in that 2020 year alone, with that next step being autonomous, of course. And as a final slide, conclusion, whether we look at people transportation or goods transportation, I think cities are facing a dual challenge. On one hand, a finite infrastructure. On the other hand, an infrastructure that is not utilized in an efficient manner, and the asset operating on that infrastructure inefficiently utilized as well. The thing is, we are lacking data. We are lacking connectivity. Just imagine if airports will operate as cities. What a mess will it be? We need to have a kind of a control tower, in my mind, for cities to help optimize, leveraging IoT technologies, artificial intelligence, and machine learning to really optimize the flow of data, the flow of activities, to optimize the resources, And that city mobility operating system should actually integrate 4 fundamental layers of the city environment: that regulatory layer, that infrastructure layer, that technology layer, that transport layer, to provide a sort of an optimized, integrated, and collaborative environment that will help to reduce the inefficiencies that we are seeing. Because in reality, that smart mobility that we are talking about has to start with the optimization of the existing asset. And that so concludes my presentation. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope we have time for a few questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Franck Leveque. Thank you. We don't have much time for some questions. I'm going to ask you 1 or 2. The first one is, do you think, Franck, that commercial fleets, LCV fleets, are leading by example compared to passenger car fleets and other types of fleets, if you look at the implementation of new trends like electrification, connected solutions, sustainability, last mile, etc.?
Well, I think the connectivity, if you look at connectivity in different types of fleets, the highest penetration that you see in connectivity is in the truck segment. So heavy trucks, medium and heavy trucks is showing penetration in Europe around 35%. That gives you an idea of the difference. But at the same time, on the passenger vehicle, you see probably half of what I was presenting earlier in the LCV market. So LCV is sort of a bang in the middle. I think there's also extreme diversity in the utilization of connectivity to improve efficiency. In the last mile delivery, I think connectivity has become fundamental in that efficiency sort of a drive. But I think there's still huge opportunities to actually optimize, cross-pollinate across fleets, because at the moment we are operating in silos. And I think there's exciting development around supply chain visibility, around really building digital visibility across the value chain within specific environment, with control towers for cities as well that are being deployed in certain areas that will help further improvement.
Okay, Franck Leveque, thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. We hope that you can stay with us for the conference. If people have questions for Franck Leveque, but also for the other speakers, then you can connect with them via the tool. You can ask your question via the chat function. And there is also an option, of course, in the networking break to meet one-on-one. Franck Leveque, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.